Therapists of Reddit, what was the moment you realized your client couldn't be helped? On a positive note, I was let go by my therapist because I was better. Was a great moment. Edit. I should mention this was a few years ago. I've had ups and downs since then. Recently got out of a down, but I was able to learn to deal with it myself. If you're struggling right now, know your efforts are not in vain. It takes time, it takes work, it takes practice. And even when you're better, you will fall again. It happens. But you will be better equipped the next time. Stay strong. I am so glad this thread started out on a positive note. I was worried it was just going to be all doom and gloom and the worst of humanity, but no, I think we're okay for now. That being said, I'm proud of you, OP. And for anyone who's still in therapy, that doesn't mean you failed either. You're just continuing the process of learning about yourself and ways to help yourself, and that's fine. In fact, I would even say that's great. Story 2. Some of these responses I doubt are coming from therapists, so I will try to answer as clearly as I can. The first answer is, if they clearly don't want to help themselves. Therapists can guide you, provide you a useful and objective outside perspective, help you reframe your experiences, and can provide tools to help you direct your energy and thoughts. But we cannot do anything for you. We cannot start or end relationships for you. We cannot take your medication or force you to cease any of your destructive habits or practice new beneficial ones. Those are your decisions, and I cannot make any of them for you, even when to me the consequences of those decisions are clear. The second answer is when I'm not the right therapist for this client. There are many reasons why I might not be the right therapist. I have my own style of communication, my own values, and my own personality. Those may not work with a certain client. I have had a little success with certain clients who I've sent to other therapists, and they have done well. Similarly, I've taken on clients who are frustrated with their past therapists, and I have worked well with them. The last answer is when the client's pathology requires intense or medical intervention. Therapy cannot substitute for inpatient care when that is needed, and therapists cannot prescribe medication even when that would help. Unfortunately, inpatient care is always in short supply, and many clients resist that idea. You often have to advise them that they cannot see you until they complete an inpatient course of treatment. I have to be very clear here. The dramatic statement, "A therapist said I was too messed up to be helped," is often what clients hear, frequently because it advances their specific narrative, when we always will try to help, even if it means asking them to see another therapist or pursue another course of treatment. The analogy I use is that most mechanics can work on most cars, but if you have an unusual foreign car, you'll probably get better results finding a mechanic with more experience working on that brand. I cannot help you is never the same as you cannot be helped. Story 3. I am a therapist for intimate offenders. One particular client was a drug user, but thus far did not seem to interfere with his therapy. It was in no way related to his criminal acts. Until one day, he showed up for his appointment completely high on hard drugs. He had already been awake for 48 plus hours. Turned out his drug abuse was way worse than he would make it seem. He also severely damaged his dong while high, he told us. We immediately referred him to a rehab and never heard from him since. This is a prime example of what the last OP was talking about. It's a therapist being like, look, this problem, beyond my pay grade, and I just am not suited. I don't have the equipment or the knowledge to deal with it. And as such, someone else can help you better. And it's true. There is pretty much no reason a therapist will be like, you can't be helped. If they believed that about anyone, there's a good chance they wouldn't be in that field to begin with. Story 4. I had a therapist send me a very kindly worded letter that told me she couldn't see me anymore until I found a way to remember appointments and show up. 3 months later, I called and said I found a way to remember and I wanted to try again. She took me back and I never missed another appointment. Doing that was crucial. I needed to make therapy a priority for it to help. If I hired a personal trainer but never showed up or never did any of the exercise, then even the best personal trainer could not help me. A therapist is a personal trainer for the mind. They can't actually fix or do any of the work. They can only suggest work or help their clients choose work to do. The client can't be passive. They must do work. Story 5. This happened with my brother. My mom signed him up for much needed therapy, and he went for about a month or so before coming home very angry one day and saying he was never going back. My mom talked to the therapist and she really couldn't tell any details for confidentiality reasons. But the gist basically seemed to be that she spent the entire month listening to him and trying to get him to think about things on a deeper level. And when she finally started outlining things from an outside perspective that he didn't align with, he got very angry with her. He quite literally couldn't handle the truth. Prime example of a client who doesn't want to help themselves and as such can't be helped. A big reason why signing someone else up for therapy is almost never the play. It's not going to help unless they have that own intrinsic motivation to do it. Story 6. My sister was let go by her therapist because she was lying to him constantly. He told my dad the therapy was a waste of money as long as she wasn't prepared to face her issues. It's been about 20 years since then, and she is still a train wreck. I coincidentally started seeing him a few years later for depression, and he was wonderful. I didn't want medication, so he didn't recommend starting any, and the CBT was really what I needed to get out of the thought cycle I was in. Once we both felt like I was in a good place and had developed the tools I needed, he let me go. Great guy, that really helped me. Story 7. They had an advanced extreme case of antisocial personality disorder. Too agitated, too aggressive, with substance abuse. After months in therapy at a hospital, there was no progress whatsoever and nothing to be done. Their family didn't want them, neither did the police, nor did the hospital. And after setting their bed on fire and harming the other patients, I was just too scared to work with them. So I closed the file and spoke to the doctor to find another solution. Sadly, COVID happened and they had to lay off a majority of the staff in the hospital. Since I was new, I was let go. I still don't know what happened to the patient. Story 8. Not a therapist, but I cleaned house bi-weekly for an absolutely wonderful woman for a few years. She was actually one of my professors in college for a couple of lit classes, and during that time she was going through a pretty severe battle with depression. She was seeing a therapist on a regular basis, but one day when I came over, she said her therapist had let her go. When I asked why, she said she was told it was because she smelled like mold, and it was disrupting her therapist's respiratory system, which they claimed took them at least a day to bounce back from. Needless to say, she sank a bit deeper into her depression, and it took a few months before she had the gumption to try and meet another therapist. Not once did I ever catch even a whiff of something nasty, mold or otherwise. Not on her, or in her house, or in her car. I'm a pretty detailed cleaner, too. I take covers off of air vents and stick the vacuum hose down there, pull out the drawers and clean all the crumbs out of the corners. It was hard not to take a tiny bit of offense myself, and it's not even my house. It so obviously deeply upset her and made it much more difficult for her to battle with her depression. Not to mention how much more vulnerable she must have felt about seeking further help elsewhere. I still want to rage punch her old therapist just thinking about it, and it's been close to 4 years now. This one is interesting to me because it's like, what did the therapist smell? What was going on there? Was it the therapist's own issue, or was there really something specific? Who knows? I really want to know what the objective truth is on this one, and it's just something that I will never know. Story 9. I was a therapist for the British Army for a while. I don't think I ever had a patient who was flat out beyond help. There were a couple that were beyond my help, and so I had to refer them on to specialists. But that's not uncommon in that kind of job. Not every therapist is equipped to deliver every kind of therapy. It's more about being able to recognize when your methods aren't benefiting the patient, and when a different approach would be more effective for them. There isn't really such a thing in the practice of therapy as someone being a lost cause. Story 10. My SO's mother is a textbook narcissist and has brainwashed every therapist into thinking that they're perfect, and that she only needs to be in therapy to deal with the unnecessary and unwarranted stress that her children and family at large cause her. She's created a very intimate relationship with her current therapist, like almost romantic. They text each other every day, and at the end of the day, they exchange this phrase: "Good night, my heart mate." This therapist was reputable, but is now wrapped around my SO's mother's finger and believes that she can do no wrong. This level of narcissism is something I never knew I would witness, let alone be involved with to some degree. They will never be able to get help at this rate. Now, I am always skeptical of stories that are like, brainwashed every therapist. Like, that phrase just raises red flags for me, because surely not every therapist can fall for the same wiles and tricks. They're supposed to be empathetic, but they're also supposed to be able to, like, take a step back and see situations, you know? That being said, if OP's SO's mother really does text her therapist, "Good night, my heartmate," every night, that's weird. Not a relationship you should have with your therapist, in my opinion. Story 11. I'm not a therapist, but I'm a qualified counselor who worked with traumatized young people in a residential home. Essentially, my team and I were surrogate parents for these kids, each spending between 1 and 3, sometimes 5, nights a week at the house. Before the case that broke me, I had experienced a lot of different behaviors. Intimate behaviors, violent outbursts, reactive attachment. I'd worked with kids who'd burnt down houses, solicited themselves, used intravenous drugs, unalived family pets, attempted to unalive siblings, etc. I thought I'd seen enough to become callous to it all. I was at work with 2 young people I absolutely adored. They called me uncle, a term of respect and endearment in Indigenous Australians, when I got a call at 9:30 p.m. at night asking me to relieve a shift the next morning with an intense case. I accepted because before this kid, I thought I was Superman and could handle anything. I arrived at 6 a.m. and got a handover and a heads up from the workers on shift. They warned me this kid was violent, but as far as I knew it wasn't anything I hadn't seen before. There's an expression, eyes are the window to the soul. When you looked into the eyes of this child, there was a darkness unlike anything I'd seen before or likely will ever see again. It was obvious that the evils this child had endured had destroyed their soul. This child attempted to proposition me for intimate favors as soon as we were alone. When I tried to redirect the conversation to appropriate methods of expressing gratitude, this child shifted. They took a pencil out from under the desk and charged full pelt, screaming, "You're a frickin' pedo-assaulter. You're just like the rest of them. Don't frickin' touch me." This child proceeded to stab me multiple times before the other worker was able to subdue them. This same child was on a very unique child safety order. The terms of the order were a direct contradiction of the legislation and had to be signed by the state manager. This child was to be kept on site unless medically necessary due to the danger to themselves and the community. Once the escalation settled and the nighttime routine began, the child asked me for more soap. This had to be given in small containers at a time to avoid the child creating slip traps for workers. As I approached with the soap, the child had peeled the mirror off the bathroom wall and smashed it over my head before lunging at me with a shard. I managed to catch their wrist and disarm them while my coworker secured the debris. The child then swallowed a piece of glass and smirked at my coworker and I, knowing we would have to take them to the hospital. Once at the hospital, the child ran away before even entering triage. This is where it gets interesting. In her safety plan, there were 25 possible addresses the child frequented. A common behavior of the child was to exchange intimate favors for hard drugs. So the houses we had to search for her at were filled with less than desirable folk. I received a call from the police to say they had located her at a nearby service station. Upon arriving, the child had doused themselves with fuel and threatened to light herself and the whole place on fire. She ran away again, but wasn't seen or heard from for the rest of the night. That was my first shift with a child that had put 42 other workers on work cover. I worked with them for another 8 weeks before throwing in the towel. I had a mental breakdown and began drinking heavily for the first time in 10 years. I had begun taking prescription medication for the pain. This kid broke 2 teeth and threw my back out, and for the mental anguish. I was never the same happy-go-lucky optimist again. Knowing the best solution for a child is a quick and painless death was not easy for my psyche to handle. The longer I worked with the child, the more I learned about them. They were born into a pedo ring. Their mother was the product of assault and had been touched since childhood and simply continued the cycle. That was 5 years ago, and since I've had to leave the industry. I no longer drink, but I am filled with pessimism. I refuse to have children because of that child. The fact that some kids can't be saved scares me out of risking having my own. I still have nightmares about this kid. I don't know if any of this makes sense, so please let me know if any parts are confusing. Just the way that OP wrote this out, it's really clear how much this has affected them. This is such a horrible situation for everyone mentioned in the story. The kid was basically never given a chance in life and was always destined to become like this. And seeing that level of hopelessness, I guess, just destroyed OP, and I think it would destroy most people. When your whole job is to help people through things and make life better, finding a life that breaks you, that must crush the soul. It's unfortunate that OP didn't want to have children because this one scared them so bad. Surely deep down OP knows that there's no way their child would end up like this. It's not the right environment to contribute to that kind of behavior. But I understand the fear nonetheless. OP, I'm incredibly sorry. Story 12. Not a therapist, but rather a client. And I ended up giving a therapist an existential crisis once. He had to drop me after that. It was pretty out of the blue, and he made it very clear and apparent to me that at some point during our sessions, something was triggered in him that unleashed a whole load of his own trauma. It began to bleed through what you would expect of the typical boundaries a therapist would have between clients. And he even mentioned that after our sessions, he couldn't get it out of his head. He politely advised me that he wouldn't be able to see me anymore because he had to seek a therapist himself before he could start seeing other clients. Fortunately, I was able to continue seeing a different therapist that he recommended to me, and I'm doing fine now. But I still joke about the time that I won therapy. Huge props to this therapist for being able to take a step back and realize that it's like, this is not healthy for me. I need to stop doing this for a moment. I feel like when it comes to professional work especially, it's easy to get locked in a way and feel like you have to keep going, but I guess a therapist would be especially good at recognizing these things. So good on them, realizing that they were no longer in a position to help the way they need to. Story 13. I had a therapist tell me I was better and drop me when I was going through one of the worst moments in my life after seeing her for a year and a half. She was the director of a psychiatric ward at a local hospital and did therapy as a side gig to feel like she was making a direct impact. She would constantly interrupt me and tell me that she couldn't relate due to her happy childhood. She would get frustrated when one session on a topic wouldn't fix lifelong trauma. She even went as far as to say that she wouldn't touch some of my issues because I clearly wasn't going to get better, even though those issues were nowhere near as serious as some of the other things we covered. Looking back, she was clearly doing therapy as a way to make herself feel better, and not seeing immediate results was frustrating her because it wasn't this fun, feel-good side gig that she wanted. 2 months after being dropped, I had a serious panic attack and ended up finding another therapist who was a much better fit. I've made more improvement in the past 6 months with this therapist than the entire time with my previous therapist, and I'm so much happier now. It goes to show that therapists really need to be the right fit. Story 14. I work in a high school. Couldn't make this up if I tried. It's one of our contract peer support counselors' last weeks before she moves on to a new job. And she came up to me shaking a few hours ago, and I was basically like, what's up? She said the student she's been working with for the past 2 months, who was basically a train wreck, just got a new boyfriend, and they were already sleeping together. But they were happy, and when she showed her a picture of him, it was the counselor's 19-year-old brother. She was like, what the hell? What do I do? I can't break confidentiality, but it's my brother and it's kind of breaking the law. Plus, she said the two of them together are just a bad combo, just a WTF moment. I swear, this could easily be turned into a horror movie. Young lady wants to help troubled youth. Kid gets attached. Adult gets offered a new job. Kid flips out, goes psycho, and stalks her. Starts dating younger brothers just to attend family functions, just to be near her, where she confesses her love and tries to unalive her. A lot of the time when people say this could be a movie or something, I don't really buy it. This one, I kind of see it. The whole someone getting more unhinged because of someone else, it's a common, I guess, archetype, trope, something. As such, I could see this being a movie. That being said, the situation itself, horrifying. I do not enjoy any of what I just read. Story 15. I'm not a therapist, but I volunteered in a mental health cafe with qualified counselors. We often, volunteers included, had training from the NHS on self-unalive threats and self-harm, and we would have meetings with people high up in the mental health field for better insight on how we could assist these people. The mental health cafe, in part, was made to actually give people a place to turn to in crisis, without needing to be sent to a mental health hospital. If the ambulance service got a call for a mental health crisis, they would take the patient to us instead of emergency. I was volunteering there because I myself was extremely unwell mentally and thought it could help me. What I learned in those meetings with the experts, I'll never forget. Most patients they can't speak to can't be saved. And they weren't expecting us to believe we could either. We needed to abandon that thought, otherwise it would crush us. Keeping a patient alive isn't perceived as saving them. Most of the time we just encourage them away from self-unalive because they are a ticking time bomb for mental health. If they die, their family inherits that pain and trauma instead. An hour of conversation every few days away from their family wasn't going to help them. It was just a metaphorical way of giving them oxygen. Only the patient could ultimately save themselves, and oftentimes they were too far beneath the water to reach anyone. I stopped volunteering there shortly after that. They were so casually talking about my situation without realizing it. My mental health has improved greatly since, but it's definitely declining again. This thread has made me realize I need to reach out to people again. I never want to go back to that headspace. OP makes a really poignant point here in keeping a patient alive isn't perceived as saving them, because a lot of the time it kind of isn't. You're addressing a symptom, not the root cause, and therefore the symptom is just going to come back, and sometimes stronger and worse. That being said, if you're finding yourself having any thoughts like described here or anywhere in this thread, I do still encourage you to go see a therapist and everything. As I'm sure you know now after listening to all of this if you didn't before, therapists always want to help, and there are almost no cases where a client truly can't be helped. But the most important part of that is the client has to want to be helped. If this is you, I hope this video gives you the push to do so. And regardless, I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you in the next one.